Hi guys, Amber here. Welcome back to another episode of In Conversation with ATF. My guest today is a screenwriter, a producer, and all-around nice guy who is adored by tons of people on Facebook. He has his own fan group dedicated to him. He's the screenwriter for The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Atlantis The Lost Empire, Tarzan, Brother Bear, Superman/Batman Apocalypse. He's also done the teleplay for episodes of Thundercats and Teen Titans Go, and believe it or not, he actually worked on Be Cool Scooby Do at one point, and also the Bubbleheads film from 2020. My guest is Tab.
Thank you for mentioning that one. Appreciate that.
Well, if you don't want me to mention it, I don't
but
mind.
You forgot my best friend is a vampire. Oh my God.
Oh, sorry. My best friend is a vampire. Yeah.
That's very sweet of you. Happy to be here chatting. To have those kind of credits means I've been around for a while, and I have. So a long while, and it gets longer. But I'm pleased to be here and happy to chat about whatever suits your fancy.
I've got a fan in my room because it's absolutely, we're having a heat wave over here, but this is what I found.
There you go. Right.
I know people can't really see it because of how bright it is.
I can see it. Atlantis is waiting, and Amber, it's still waiting.
I haven't even watched the film. I'm very sorry to say that. I still haven't watched the film. I've been meaning to watch it for the longest time, but I've been so busy with college and stuff, and I've just produced my first ever voiceover reel, so I've got to send that off to people and stuff like that. So
yeah.
I thought summer was meant to be for relaxing.
You've never seen Atlantis at all? At all?
I've seen clips of it, but not the entire film in general.
Well, this is going to be a hell of an interview.
Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I really should have done my research.
I'm kidding. Listen, that's a lot of watching. If you actually just sat down to binge those 4 movies, you'd be tied up all day and beyond. So I don't blame you. We're all busy, man. So, yeah. But enough. I'm happy to talk about Atlantis or anything else.
That's great. Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Great. Well, in that case, I'd like to start off by obviously jumping in the deep end with Atlantis. What inspired the creation of Atlantis Lost Empire?
Well, what inspired it really was probably the collective childhoods of the 4 principal creators involved, which would have been myself, Don Hahn, the producer, and the 2 directors, Gary Trousdale and Kirk Wise. Because we had already previously worked together on Hunchback, and we had a great time making that film. I had a great time writing that film for those guys, and they came off of Hunchback and wanted to jump right into another movie, to do another animated feature. And they asked if I would be interested in participating, and of course I said yes. And this time out of the gate, they wanted to do something very different than what they'd been doing. They'd done Beauty and the Beast. They'd done Hunchback. These were both, in terms of Disney templates of musical comedies that kind of fit the bill, although Hunchback was a little bit darker than Beauty and the Beast. So this time they did not want to do songs. They wanted to do an all-out sort of boys' own action adventure that was really kind of drawn from each of our collective experiences of growing up as kids and the kinds of movies we watched that thrilled us in the theaters when we were kids. Some of them were Disney films, some of them were other films like Journey to the Center of the Earth and things like that. So that's really where it began. And Atlantis really started at a lunch we all 4 of us had at a Mexican restaurant here in Burbank, where we just sat for a couple hours drinking margaritas, eating nachos, and talking about those kinds of movies that we loved. And I think by the end of that lunch, we had come up with kind of a big idea that, Kirk and Gary especially wanted to do a story about explorers going into the earth and finding something cool. I mean, at that point, we didn't know whether it was going to be Atlantis or the Holy Grail or treasure, or, everything was still on the table. But that lunch was really the genesis of what would become Atlantis, the Lost Empire.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, That actually sounds like really good fun. Like, just you guys just sat around a table just eating nachos and just thinking of movie ideas, definitely. So did you have a hand in picking the cast of the films, like Michael J. Fox?
I didn't. No. I basically, my hand was early on in the production, in terms of creating characters, in terms of creating the story, the sequences, action, the relationships, all of the stuff that went into that that what would become Atlantis the Lost Empire. Although, I would come in for meetings and they would have, already having drawn, sort of character sketches of the characters.
Yeah.
And beside those character sketches were names of people that they believed could voice that particular character. I can't remember if Michael J. Fox was at the top of the list for Milo in those days or not. I wasn't too invested in the voice acting. I was more invested in like making sure that we had a great story to tell. And frankly, I wasn't really, I didn't have a lot of input into. I mean, I'm sure if I'd have said, "Hey, what about this guy for that guy," but that really wasn't my job. That was more the directors and the producers' job of finding the right voices, and they had far more experience than I did at voice actors, and they were really great too because on Hunchback, especially even at Disney, they weren't star driven in the sense that, oh, we got to get stars, that's how we sell these movies. No, they were all about getting the right voice for the right character, and it didn't matter if they were a big star or a non-star or a Broadway star. It didn't matter, and they all had heard many voices, so they had much more experience in that regard than I did. So I was happy to stay in my lane, as it were.
Yeah. Sorry, just move the fan on me because it's like, it's weird. This is the second heat wave we've had this hot summer, and we're not used to it.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, it's been warm here in LA as well, but nothing like what you guys are experiencing. And the whole climate, the whole planet is kind of messed up.
Literally on fire.
Regard. It's so weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that was kind of so yeah. I wasn't involved in the recording of the voices at all. That was all. Those guys just had so much experience. There was no need for me to be there during that. And frankly, other writers came in after me on both Hunchback and Atlantis, and refined and scenes, and pitched alternate lines for dialogue and things like that. That's how. So no, it was but I had a great time on that both those projects, frankly.
I'm glad you did. Go back to not Atlantis, excuse me, Hunchback. You said about
Yeah.
the casting of that film, and like how it was like not all celebrities and stuff. I mean, Tony J as Frollo was probably the best casting that Disney got in the 90s. I'm not being funny.
I still could conjure that voice in my head, and I'm just like that, in a certain
Baby,
scene.
a monster.
I mean, it's and so that combination of that voice and the character I wrote and was subsequently refined, by the artists and this and that. That villain in particular, just for whatever reason, still to this day resonates with a lot of people that saw that movie as a kid, and then have watched that movie again as an adult, and then sort of like clued into the different layers in that character.
Yeah.
Some of those layers which went right over their head as kids watching it. And then so I get messages like, "Oh my God, fuck, I didn't know that he was such a pervert," or I didn't get when I watched him as a kid that he was, oh, he's depraved, he's this, that. I mean, wow, Anyway, I think Frollo sticks out because he was so real. He wasn't a caricature villain. He wasn't a over the top villain like Captain Hook or any other Disney villain. He was very real. He was understated. He was obsessed, and very rarely did he until the end of the movie sort of go nutso, go crazy, and let his psychosis take over. He was very controlled and methodical in his philosophy and his beliefs, and that made him so much more scary, on so many levels.
Yeah, and it's also down to the voice acting in the film as well, because obviously I don't know who voice directed Hunchback. I might have to just look up at it after this interview. I'll probably just have a thing on the screen saying this is who voice directed Hunchback. But whoever did it.
Well, I think that was the directors. I think the
Oh,
directors
was
were
it?
very, very heavily involved. Kirk and Gary they were the voice directors for Hunchback and Atlantis.
Oh, right, I
They may have
see.
had a Disney voice coach there. I don't know. I've never asked the guys this, but I think it was all three. Don Hahn, Kirk and Gary. They recorded everybody. They were there and they worked with the actors and they recorded everybody.
I see. Wow, I really want to reach out to them now as well, because I think like we'd have to just complete the whole. What's a trilogy, but it's 4 people. It's like quadrilogy or something like that. I don't know. So I have to
Yeah,
get
I'm
you,
not
then
sure.
Don, then Gary, then
Yeah,
Kirk.
it was a quadrilogy for a while, especially the first year and a half on Hunchback. We worked
Quadrilogy. Yeah.
exclusively together for the most part, along with storyboard artists, and then then they brought in other writers because when you produce an animated movie, you don't just start it at the beginning and then go all the way through. You start it everywhere in that movie and you push this way through sequences. And one writer cannot just, because things come up. I mean, ideas, story artists have ideas for a sequence that need to be written, need to be scripted. One writer cannot service the entire movie all at once, and so that's why other writers are brought in. Some writers are brought in because they're just adept at comedy. Some writers are brought in because they're adept at story. uh, some are brought in for anyway, but you have these writers that are on call that do the sort of the what I would consider the 9 to 5 work on a production, being there available to help in those situations. Usually I did not do any of that on any of the movies. Had already moved on to another project by that time. So I always likened myself to the starting pitcher in a baseball game. And my job was to get through 7 innings with a lead and then pass it off to the closers that would come in after me. And
Yeah.
I know you probably don't know American baseball, so that metaphor probably means nothing to you, but it might to some of your audience. So there you go.
Yeah, I do have a fair amount of viewers from America, so they probably will get what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I don't know much about sport
That's
in
a
general as well. Well, I guess my knowledge killed Tab. Oh, never mind, he's back.
We had a hiccup, but we're back.
My lack of knowledge killed your camera. Yeah, well, I don't know about sport in general, not just American sport, British sport. I don't know much about rugby. I don't know much about football. I'm just not a sporty person. The only sport I like is
Well,
running.
I won't hold that against you, Amber.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. So I'd like to move on to
Sure.
the Facebook group.
Oh yeah.
Tab Murphy, movie, the magic and mayhem posting, which has
Oh,
got
that
about
group. Sure. That's
3.8k.
yeah. I listen. I have a lot of fun with that page. I mean, the story that began with COVID and lockdown and how I discovered Atlantis The Lost Empire posting and
Oh
some of the other
yeah.
pages. So those were pages that I began to initially post things, especially in the Atlantis fan group. Um, because there was a lot of thirst for just any information about that movie because there was not a lot out there, frankly. So I had no problem pulling the veil back a little bit and posting things like early outlines and early versions of the script and character descriptions and really cool stuff because I was as when I was growing up, I was a fan of movies that I would have just given my eye teeth to know more of, to know behind the scenes, to know how Jaws was, like what that was really like. One of my favorite movies when I was in high school was Jaws, and I just would have died to know more about it. So that's where it all began. But then, you know, as you pointed out, my credits are more than just animated features. And so somebody suggested, well, why don't you start another site that you could, you know, like, and I thought, well, I could talk about other things other than Atlantis, where I could post, you know, funny
Yeah.
shit or whatever's
Yeah.
on my mind and that kind of a, and so that's where
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
particular
Yeah.
page was born. And I have a
Yeah.
lot of fun there. I have a lot of fun interacting with people and posting stuff, you know, like not just from the animated movies, but other things that are going on as well in my life and things like that. So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. Yeah, it seems that you found like a new audience with on Facebook, not just with people who are let's say old in the right in the nicest way possible, old enough to have seen the films when they came out on
Right.
video or in cinemas, but also people who like me who are like younger than 18 or in that teenage demographic, if you get what I mean, in that sort of thing, which I
You're
think is
younger
really
than
cool.
you're younger than 18. Is that
I
what you're
am
telling
18.
me? Thank God. Okay, at least you're an adult. You know,
Eh.
then I can drop an F-bomb and not feel guilty.
Yeah, it's fine. People
Uh,
drop F bombs all the time. Go ahead.
uh, no, that's cool. You know, listen, I've had a great time. It's been quite an awakening.
Yeah.
And you know, I think I'm 65 years old. Okay,
You're
so
65.
nothing.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't have
nothing.
thought. You look not
Yeah.
like 65. You look really young.
What the fuck? Thank you. Appreciate that. But at 65, I've pretty much seen it all. I've pretty much done
Yeah.
it all, and so this sort of eruption of fandom and kind of people just like really, you know, like acknowledging the work and the movies, and it's been a lot of fun and stuff. But it doesn't go to my head whatsoever. If I was like 25 or something and this was all happening, I would have been a lot. It would have, I don't know. I don't think I would have been terrible, but you know, it would have been a different kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Now it's like I enjoy it, but it doesn't go to my head, and I don't, you know, whether it's 3.8K or 39K on the Atlantis website. I don't, or you know, what's important to me is that people that normally, you know, may not have a voice or may not get heard in terms of their just, you know, passion for these projects, that they do get heard and that they do have an outlet to express, whether it's their gratitude about the movie or characters in the movie that affected them at a certain age, or all of those things. All of those stories that they've shared have been awesome, and I love hearing them. And I'm just lucky that I was at a right place at the right time in the 90s to write 4 movies that a lot of people still consider sort of their seminal sort of developmental moments that they shared with these movies, you know.
Yeah.
So it's very cool. That part is very cool, and I don't
Yeah.
take it for granted. So, and you know, I send free posters all over the world, you
Yeah.
know, and I do that because I'm very grateful for the fans out there. I'm very grateful that they share with me how important these movies were. So it's the very least I can do to sort of like just give them a little piece of what it is that they are passionate about in the form of a signed poster. That's easy, you know. And that was something that during the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown,
Yeah.
gave me something to do as well. So that was that, and I still do it to this day. So it's that part of it is really cool, really fun too.
Yeah, well, we've known each other for a while now. I mean, I remember getting my poster 2 years ago next month, and I can't believe that has gone by so fast. Because I was,
Well, yeah, I was thinking about that earlier too. I mean, I was like, wow, I've known some of these people, and yourself included, for almost 3 years. You know,
yeah,
that
like,
I've been sort of like, I can go down. Everybody's like, I can see all the people that have joined that page, or even friends on Facebook, and I go, you know, because before before the pandemic and the Atlantis homepage, I had like 274 Facebook friends. I now have 5,000. And mainly because I just like, yeah, come on in. What the fuck? I'll share my life with you guys. You're just, but everybody's so cool, so nice. And I now go down that list of 5,000 friends and I go, I know everybody. I know these people. I mean, like I know, I recognize all these thousands of names, and I'm like, holy shit, man, that's incredible. That in the span of 2.5 to 3 years, that I've managed to, like interact with these people, and I kind of feel like I know them, that they're friends. Very cool, but very bizarre.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the wonder of the internet. Is you can connect with anyone you like, and it's weird to
Yeah,
think before the internet, like you couldn't do anything like it as well. I suppose you could do like pen pal, like letters and stuff, but
yeah.
this
But you couldn't do
totally different.
5,000 in a month.
No, not at all. No. And it's not just Hunchback and Atlantis you've done. You've also done Tarzan and Brother Bear as well. So, what was
Right.
it like working on those films?
Well, I mean, they were great. I mean, all four of those movies, and people often ask me, well, which is your favorite? Well, and my basic answer is, well, that's like asking me to choose which of my 6 kids are my favorite.
Oh
You
yeah, you
just
have six
don't,
kids,
you
kids,
don't,
don't you? Yeah.
yeah, you don't, I mean, the other 5 are standing there looking as you choose one, and I just couldn't do that to them or to the movies I worked on, because they all were special in their own way. I mean, Tarzan, and weirdly, like starting with Hunchback, um, they all 4 of those movies are weirdly connected to me in very sort of deep and meaningful ways. Hunchback was I was a monster kid growing up in the 60s, so
Mhm.
I just loved scary movies. I love monster movies, and in those days as a kid in the 60s, a lot of the movies that I watched were the old Universal scare horror movies like Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman,
Yeah.
and Hunchback was lumped into that sort of canon of Universal monsters in those days. So I was very aware of that story, that I'd seen movie iterations of that story by the time I was 10 years old. Okay. I knew that story. I knew the tragic underpinnings of it. And the Hunchback, even though he was labeled a monster, he was a man. I mean, so there was that sort of weird, kind of uh tragic sort of aspect to that character that I was aware of even at a very early age. So when Disney offered me that, as the first project that I would do for them, I was like, I was beyond excited. I was like, yes, okay, let's go. And there was, some speed bumps along the way in terms of figuring out a tone and things that wouldn't belittle this amazing piece of literature into singing and dancing animals and a cute little hunchback walking around, like that was not something I was interested in doing.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Disney was not interested in doing that either. They really wanted
Ah.
to they were willing to embrace a more darker tone, which in turn embraced the more adult thematics of the story. But it was finding that balance between that and also making it accessible to their demographic,
Yeah.
which
No
obviously the
fun
younger
allowed.
audience. Exactly. So that was amazing. And then right after that, I was offered Tarzan, which again was such a seminal character in my growing up years, because I loved Tarzan. I watched old Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies. I loved every TV series iteration of Tarzan. Tarzan was just like, I just loved the idea of this sort of man living in the jungle with apes and, surviving and becoming the king of these beasts and all of that stuff. So when they offered me Tarzan, it was again such a no-brainer. I mean, and it was great. I had a great time writing that character. I had a great time working on that. I didn't work on it as long as I worked on Hunchback, because Kirk and Gary and Don had finished Hunchback while I was writing Tarzan, and they approached me and said, "Hey, we want you to do our next movie, and can we get started anytime soon?" So I said, "Yeah, let me work it out with the Tarzan guys." But so I left that project a little early, in the sense that I didn't go to a lot of screenings of work in progress, story reels, and all that stuff, like I did on Hunchback. So when I left Tarzan, the next time I actually saw any of it was at the premiere.
Ah.
And I'd only seen artwork. I'd only seen, and I'd worked on the script and gotten it to a place where, and some of the same writers that were on Hunchback late in the game came on after me on Tarzan. Which was great because I already knew that they would do a great job and finish up the film. And so I remember sitting at the El Cap Theater in Hollywood Boulevard, which Disney owns, and watching the premiere of Tarzan and being completely blown away by the movie. I just thought it was so great, and being very proud of my association with it. And so at the very end of the film, they had this, I think Phil Collins has some reprise or does some song over the end credits. And while the end credits was rolling, the screen goes up and there's Phil and his band playing it live, right? It was the
Wow.
coolest thing. And then they proceeded to play some Genesis songs, some Phil songs, and a few Disney songs from Tarzan. It was such a great premiere. I was so excited. So that was great. That was awesome. But the movie I left to work on was Atlantis. So again, Atlantis represented the kinds of movies that we all loved as kids. And so there was a direct connection once again to my childhood, to their childhoods, to the kind of wow factor when you sat in a dark theater and were allowed yourself to be taken away to whatever strange land, strange, crazy place, strange adventure you would go on. And then Brother Bear, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in the mountains and I loved wilderness, and I grew up fishing and backpacking and camping and doing all those things outdoors. And subsequently I spent a lot of time in the Canadian wilderness as well. And I've seen grizzly bears in the wild. I love bears. And so when that was offered to me, it's like, again, right in my wheelhouse, like I could, and I love Native American culture. They wanted to do something with and I just thought, man, it's just like the movie gods are being really kind to me because they're offering me stuff that is just so in my wheelhouse, all through those 4 movies. So that's why I kept saying yes and didn't walk away and do other things.
Yeah.
So there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
So my fingerprints are all over each of those 4 movies in a big way because all those movies represent who I am, a piece of who I am. So that's the coolest thing about those movies when I think back on them.
Yeah, I agree with you. Tab, may I ask you, what cartoons were you inspired by growing up before you wrote for these films, or like what cartoons did
Oh,
you
you
watch
mean
growing up?
cartoons for me as a kid?
Yeah, maybe
I
you
mean,
could.
I watched Scooby Doo. I watched Johnny Quest was a huge one. I don't know if you know Johnny Quest.
Yeah, of course I do. I know all the Hanna-Barbera shows.
Okay, well, so I loved all the Hanna-Barbera. Wally Gator is the fastest alligator in the swamp. I mean, I could all those. I mean, Speed Racer when I was a little older was an
Scooby
afternoon
Diddly, Secret
show.
Squirrel, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, Secret. Oh no, all of those, all of those. And and I loved Looney Tunes. I mean, that was a Saturday morning staple when I was a kid. I grew up with 5 brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of Saturday morning cartoon watching in the 60s and the early 70s. And so Looney Tunes, Bugs, all of those, I just go down the list. Love them all. Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. Great storytelling without any dialogue. You can learn a lot on how to tell a story visually by just watching those cartoons.
Yeah, with a
But
bird and a stick of dynamite.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, I mean those were the things that I loved watching growing up. I loved Woody Woodpecker. I loved them, all of them. I was a
Yeah.
huge fan, huge fan.
Wow, just like me, because I'm a huge animation buff as well. I love all the old cartoons, new cartoons, from any
Yeah.
genre. It's kind of cool
But
considering like. Oh,
but I had no inkling that I would end up writing animation. I mean, in those days, I mean, I just loved them. And in fact, when I really decided that getting into the movie businesses was going to be what my life's goal was, and I came down. Animation was the furthest thing from my mind. I wanted to be a serious filmmaker. I wanted to tell serious stories, live action. That was it. Gorillas in the Mist was my first real movie that sort of like I look at as a pivotal moment in my career, and so animation was like the furthest thing from my mind for the longest time, interestingly enough. Yet it ended up becoming a huge 12-year chunk of my career, and probably to this day, if I didn't have any of those Disney movies that I'd written, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
No, well, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe because of the work
Well,
you've done for like Scooby.
I mean, I had other things that were
Titans.
cool, but
Yeah.
those Disney movies, one thing I didn't take for granted, but I didn't quite fully understand was how worldwide and global those movies and those characters became, because Disney has far-reaching tentacles, as it were, and it was never more apparent to me than a few years before the pandemic. A buddy of mine who was running a studio in Hawaii asked me to come over and check out what they were doing and see if there's anything we could do to work together while I was there. And he had a screening room in this studio. And while I was there, he said, "Hey, listen, there's a film school down the street. They found out you were here. They were wondering if they could screen Gorillas in the Mist for their class of, sort of 20 somethings. All of them want to be filmmakers and things." And I said, "And would you be available for a Q&A afterwards?" And I said, "Sure." So they came, great group of people, probably 30 or 40 students. They screened Gorillas in the Mist. I hadn't seen it in a long, long time. So that was fun for me. And then there's a Q&A afterwards. I'm on the stage with the moderator, and he's asking some questions about gorillas. They take a few questions from the audience, and it's kind of a few hands go up, and it's very sedate. It's very quiet. It's like fine. And then the moderator goes, "Oh, by the way, you may not realize, but Tab also wrote a bunch of Disney movies. He did Hunchback, Tarzan, Brother Bear, Atlantis." You should have seen that room, Amber. It fucking was like suddenly everybody had electricity under their seat and were jolted. They just came alive in a way I just couldn't believe it. And they hands up everywhere, and afterwards, 20 deep, wanting to get a selfie with me. "Wait till I tell my mom I met you." Blah, blah. And that was my real first inkling at the power of the Disney movies had, and how, just like it was unbelievable. I just couldn't, like, it was unreal. And all these girls were like around me and guys, and I'm like, I feel like I want to take you home and tuck you to bed. They were all just like kids, like coming up, and like I was like their dad or something. Oh my God, I love that movie so much. They had to tell me. One girl was crying. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? I had never experienced that before. So that was my first real inclination that, man, maybe these movies that I've kind of not forgotten about, but they happened 20 years ago. Maybe they have a life of their own. So it was really, really an eye opener, that moment for me.
That's so wholesome. Oh, I'm gonna look at the time at the top of the screen. It says we've just got under 5 minutes left, so I want to wrap it up with one more quick question, and then I'll do an outro, and that's okay. Tab, I have one final question for you. Now, of course, after Disney, you went to Warner Brothers and you did screenplay for like Teen Titans, Batman/Superman, or Superman/Batman, whichever way around it is, and Be Cool Scooby-Doo. So, just real quick, what was it like working for those? Was it a change? How did it change from films to TV shows?
Well, first of all, you're doing TV, so that it's not quite the responsibility that you have when you, in terms of time. Like I said, on a Hunchback, I was on a year and a half, and I was like, but when you're doing TV animation, the budgets are smaller, the output is greater, and you just have to write. You're not doing an 85 or 90 minute screenplay, you're doing a 22-minute or sometimes an 11-minute, you know, in the case of Scooby-Doo. So the demand on my time was less, the pay's less, but I still had a great time, especially the reboot of Thundercats for Warner
You did
Brothers.
Thundercats as well, yeah.
I did 9 episodes of that first season, and I had a great time. So it's all, I've been very fortunate in my career that I've worked with really cool people on, you know, really cool projects. So for me to be able to write a few episodes of Scooby-Doo was yet again an ode to my childhood. And to be asked to write Batman, Superman, Apocalypse, and Batman Year One was awesome, because I knew there was no way I was going to be asked to write the live act, because Christopher Nolan had Batman in a hammerlock, and he has his own process. So I figured this is the only chance I'm going to get to write these superheroes that I grew up watching as well. Let's do it. And so it was great. It turned out to be a great experience. Yeah, I had a great time.
I'm glad to
And
hear
to
that.
this day, I go to Comic Cons, right? And people will come up and they're like, "Oh my God, Batman Year One, Batman!" And so, you know, everybody gets excited about different things, right?
Yeah.
So fun, very fun.
Oh, I'm glad I'm glad that you have found your happiness. I gotta say that.
I've had my happiness since I was about 18 or 17. So the key is to keep it through all of life's challenges, you know, because you're not immune to those things. But, you know, if you start with a base of happiness and joy, I think, you know, you can sustain and persevere.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
So, Tab, I tell you what, we can do a part 2 in the future. One day, I think the day before we set, you know, part 2, I'm going to watch all 4 films, Hunchback, Tarzan, Atlantis and Brother Bear, like all back to back in one sitting, and then I'm going to talk to you with new questions. So
perfect. Well,
yeah.
just making sure you stock up on the tissues before you start that. Because,
I will.
you know,
don't worry. Where can we find you on social media, Tab? Do you have a website? Well, I'll link the Facebook group in the description. But where can we find you on?
Well, I'm on Instagram. So Talbot Murphy, I think, at Talbot Murphy, TALBOT Murphy. So, you know, join. I post stuff there, and, you know, but my main Facebook page, you know, is pretty full. But when people drop out, I just add people. I don't care, you know. So you can find me there. You can follow me there too. So, but that's pretty much it. And then the website, you know.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll link those in the description. To you at home, thank you so much for watching this interview with the wonderful Tab Murphy. We will be, I keep saying Murphy. Why would I keep saying that? Tab Murphy. We'll be doing a part 2 in the future, so stick around for that. Thank you for watching.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, Amber. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching. Bye and cut.